The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp hummed their usual soul-draining tune, a constant reminder that even the air in this place had a corporate discount. My desk, a beige island in a sea of beige cubicles, was less a workspace and more a designated zone for quiet suffering. For 10 years, I'd been the unseen architect of order, the silent guardian of deadlines, the human equivalent of a meticulously organized spreadsheet. My name is Eleanor Vance, and my job title, Senior Administrative Coordinator, was as exciting as watching paint dry, if that paint was a particularly drab shade of corporate gray. I was the cog that kept the gears turning, the oil that prevented the screeching, the unsung hero who knew where every stray stapler was, every lost file was, and every executive's deeply hidden caffeine addiction originated. And today, my decade of quiet competence was about to be spectacularly, irrevocably, and, I hoped, hilariously disrupted. It all began with Mr. Sterling himself, or rather, the man who currently occupied that title, Bartholomew "Barty" Higgins. Barty was less a CEO and more a walking, talking synergy vomiter. He'd arrived 6 months ago with a briefcase full of buzzwords and a jawline so sharp it could slice through a quarterly report. His management style was less leadership and more tyrannical whim. He operated on the principle that loud noises and aggressive posture translated to authority, and that anyone who didn't immediately adopt his jargon was either stupid or deliberately obtuse. I, regrettably, was often the latter in his eyes. My crime? Not understanding what leveraging our bandwidth for disruptive innovation actually meant beyond a vague sense of unease. This morning, Barty had summoned me to his cavernous office, a space so sterile it probably had its own microclimate. The only thing less inviting than the polished chrome furniture was the look on his face. It was the kind of look a cat gives a mouse before the final pounce, but with more expensive cologne. He was flanked by his 2 top lieutenants, Marcus, the head of marketing, whose smile was as genuine as a $2 bill, and Chloe, the head of HR, whose default expression was one of thinly veiled condescension. "Eleanor, come in. Sit down," Barty boomed, gesturing to a chair that probably cost more than my car. "We have sensitive matters to discuss." Sensitive matters. In Barty speak, that usually meant plotting to fire someone without cause, strategizing on how to underhandedly acquire a competitor, or planning the next mandatory team-building retreat that would involve trust falls and questionable campfire songs. "I need you to book a meeting for me," he continued, leaning back in his throne-like chair. "Very important, top secret, utmost discretion." He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper, which, given the size of his office, was still audible from the lobby. "We're meeting with a third party, someone who can help us expedite certain transitions within the company." Transitions. Another Bartyism. It was his preferred euphemism for layoffs, firings, and the general dismantling of anything that didn't directly contribute to his personal stock options. Marcus chimed in, his voice slick as butter on a hot pan. "Think of it as a strategic alignment, a necessary recalibration of our talent pool to ensure maximum shareholder value." Chloe, ever the pragmatist, added, "And a very sensitive negotiation. This individual has specific needs, and we need a secure environment." Secure, sensitive, top secret. My mind immediately conjured images of darkened rooms, hushed tones, and shadowy figures exchanging briefcases filled with, what? Company secrets? Illicit coffee beans? "So," Barty leaned forward again, his eyes glinting. "You need to find us a place, somewhere private, somewhere where we won't be overheard, somewhere discreet." He paused for dramatic effect, as if revealing a groundbreaking scientific discovery. "Tomorrow, at 3 p.m. Make it happen, Eleanor." I nodded, my brain already whirring. 10 years of administrative life had honed my ability to translate corporate gibberish into actionable tasks. Barty wanted discreet. He wanted private. He wanted unheard. And he wanted it tomorrow. This was my domain. This was the quiet competence they always overlooked. "Understood, Mr. Higgins," I replied, my voice a calm counterpoint to his bluster. "I'll find the perfect location." As I left Barty's office, I carried with me not just an assignment, but a growing, mischievous glint in my own eye. They wanted discretion? They wanted secrecy. Oh, they were about to get a masterclass in how wrong things could go when you underestimated the person who managed the calendar. They forgot that in any organization, the administrator holds the keys. Not just to the supply closet, but to the entire damn schedule. My secret weapon wasn't a complex algorithm or a forgotten legal clause. It was far simpler, far more mundane, and infinitely more potent. The company's internal booking system. And a particularly well-known, strategically placed conference room. Back at my desk, I pulled up the booking system, the familiar interface glowing on my screen. My fingers danced across the keyboard, a silent prelude to the symphony of chaos I was about to conduct. Barty wanted private. Barty wanted discreet. Barty wanted to be unheard. And Barty, in his infinite, arrogant wisdom, had forgotten one crucial detail. Sterling Corp's most notoriously transparent, most visible, and most utterly glass-walled conference room, the one colloquially known as the fishbowl, was notoriously difficult to book for any significant length of time. It offered zero privacy. Anyone walking down the corridor could see every handshake, every nervous twitch, every surreptitious glance. It was the last place on earth you'd hold a clandestine meeting, unless, of course, you wanted the entire company to know exactly what you were plotting. And Barty Higgins, in his hubris, had asked me to book it. I typed in the date, tomorrow. Time, 3 p.m. Duration, 90 minutes. Then, I navigated to the room selection. My cursor hovered over Boardroom A, Executive, a small, soundproofed, oak-paneled room designed for exactly this kind of shady business. But my fingers, guided by a decade of simmering resentment and a sudden surge of strategic glee, veered left. They landed on Conference Room C, the glass house. I clicked. A little red notification popped up. Room C is in high demand. Please select an alternative. Perfect. I deliberately ignored it. I went through the motions. I tried to book Room C. I encountered an error. I panicked internally. I contacted the facilities department, a quick, pre-written email to myself, of course, to confirm availability. Then, with a flourish that would have made a concert pianist proud, I miraculously found a loophole. It involved a slightly adjusted time slot, a courtesy booking from an imaginary department head, and a carefully worded explanation about a last-minute IT upgrade that temporarily made other rooms unavailable. I essentially told myself, through the system, that Room C was the only option. I hit confirm. The system accepted it. A confirmation email zipped to Barty's inbox, Marcus's, Chloe's, and my own. It read, in part. Subject. Meeting confirmation, strategic alignment session. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Conference room. C. The glass house. My heart did a little jig. They wanted to plot a coup, to discreetly dismantle the company from within, and I had just given them a stage bathed in the harsh glare of corporate transparency. They wanted to be unheard, but they were about to be seen by everyone. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across my face. Barty Higgins, Marcus, and Chloe. They thought they were pulling a fast one. They thought they had the invisible administrator right where they wanted her. They were about to learn that sometimes, the most effective way to handle a secret plan is to expose it to the brightest possible light. And this, my friends, was just the beginning. They had asked me to book their secret meeting. I had booked it, and the world, or at least Sterling Corp, was about to watch. My decade of diligent, unappreciated work had culminated in this single, beautifully orchestrated moment. I hadn't been fired, not yet anyway. But I had been subtly sidelined, my contributions minimized, my quiet efficiency mistaken for meekness. They thought they were the architects of change. They were about to discover that the quiet person in the back, the one who kept the files organized and the coffee brewing, could also orchestrate their entire downfall. The sun was starting to dip below the cityscape outside my window, casting long shadows across my desk. The hum of the office lights seemed to mock me. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just another cog. I was the engineer of a magnificent demolition. Tomorrow, their whispers would be broadcast, their plotting would be performed. And their coup, my friends, would be the most visible, most embarrassing spectacle Sterling Corp had ever witnessed. They wanted to transition. Oh, they were going to transition, all right. Right out of their jobs. And I? I was just getting started. The quiet administrator had found her voice, and it was about to echo through those glass walls. The days that followed Barty's meeting in the glass house were a masterclass in controlled chaos, orchestrated from the quiet sanctuary of my own meticulously organized digital world. My revenge wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, deliberate implosion, engineered with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. Barty, Marcus, and Chloe had wanted secrecy, a whispered conspiracy to rewrite Sterling Corp's future. They got a spotlight, and I, Eleanor Vance, was the stage manager. My first order of business, once the confirmation email was sent, was to initiate the precautionary measures. This wasn't about malice. It was about ensuring that their ill-conceived coup wouldn't leave a trail of destruction that would harm innocent bystanders, or, more importantly, my own carefully cultivated reputation. I began by archiving every email Barty had ever sent me, from his increasingly frantic requests for agenda items, to his nonsensical pronouncements on synergy. Every communication from Marcus, dripping with his brand of marketing snake oil. Every passive-aggressive memo from Chloe, disguised as HR policy updates. I meticulously organized them into a series of encrypted folders, each labeled with a cryptic code that only I understood. It felt like creating a digital time capsule, each entry a tiny ticking bomb ready to detonate at my command. Next, I initiated a series of system maintenance protocols. This involved subtle tweaks to various company-wide software that I, in my decade of administrative service, had become intimately familiar with. I didn't delete anything, not yet. That would be too crude, too obvious. Instead, I implemented delays. Software updates that were scheduled to run instantly now took an hour. Automated reports that usually generated in seconds were now staggered over an entire business day. Critical client portals that required immediate access experienced intermittent connectivity issues. These weren't malfunctions. They were carefully timed inconveniences, designed to breed frustration and inefficiency. Each subtle drag on the company's operations was a tiny, almost imperceptible, pebble dropped into the otherwise smooth-flowing river of Sterling Corp's daily business. The first real domino fell on Tuesday morning, 2 days after Barty's transparent summit. The system that managed Sterling Corp's client relationship management, a behemoth of data that Marcus's marketing team lived and breathed, suddenly decided to embark on an unscheduled, extended diagnostic cycle. It wasn't just slow, it was effectively frozen. Emails from key clients, detailing urgent requests and promising new business, began to pile up in their inboxes, but the CRM refused to acknowledge their existence, let alone process them. Marcus, known for his theatrical displays of client management, was reportedly apoplectic. Whispers filtered back to my desk through the hushed tones of sympathetic colleagues. "Marcus is losing it," said Sarah from sales, eyes wide with concern. "He said it's never been this bad. He's getting calls from our biggest accounts, and the system just shows them as pending verification. Pending for 3 days." By Wednesday, the ripple effects had become more pronounced. The automated payroll system, another of my domain's intricately managed beasts, also began to stutter. Instead of direct deposits hitting bank accounts on time, employees received automated notifications of processing delays. Some even received partial payments. Panic, a commodity Sterling Corp usually reserved for hostile takeovers, began to seep into the air like a toxic gas. I overheard Chloe, her usual steely demeanor cracking, on a hushed phone call in the hallway. "No, I don't know why payroll is delayed. The system is recalibrating. Apparently, there was a glitch. Glitch. The word hung in the air, a weak shield against the rising tide of anxiety. My colleagues, sensing a shift, began to text and email me, their messages a blend of concern and curiosity. "Eleanor, any idea why the reporting software is taking 10 minutes to load a single file?" asked David from finance. "My entire day is shot." Another message from an old friend in it. "Something weird is going on. Systems acting up everywhere. You got any insight?" I responded to each with a polite, if slightly vague, affirmation. "Just routine maintenance, I suspect. These things happen." Routine maintenance that I was meticulously orchestrating. The true beauty of my counterplay was its reliance on the very system Barty and his cronies had entrusted to me, the internal booking and administrative infrastructure. They wanted a private meeting? I gave them a spectacle. They wanted to consolidate power? I was inadvertently laying the groundwork for their downfall. The pivotal moment, the one that would irrevocably shift the balance, arrived on Thursday. Barty, no doubt seething from the operational hiccups and the growing unease amongst the staff, had summoned me again. This time, his summons was less a request and more a demand. Eleanor, get me Marcus and Chloe. We need to finalize our next steps, and I need absolute silence. Book me the executive boardroom. Immediately. The executive boardroom. A small, soundproofed, oak-paneled chamber designed for precisely the kind of clandestine discussions Barty craved. The irony was delicious. He thought he was reclaiming control, choosing a space of ultimate discretion. He didn't realize that the keys to that room, like so many others, were ultimately under my purview. I pulled up the booking system. My fingers, now seasoned veterans of bureaucratic warfare, flew across the keyboard. I located the executive boardroom for the requested time. It was free. Too free. A small, red flag in the system, usually indicating a conflict or a need for special authorization, caught my eye. It was connected to a rarely used security protocol, a remnant from a previous IT overhaul, designed to flag any attempts to book sensitive areas without proper dual authorization from both IT and legal. It was a relic, practically forgotten. Until now. With a calculated flourish, I initiated the booking. The system, as expected, flagged it. Booking requires dual authorization from IT and legal, it declared in stark, unforgiving text. Barty, in his arrogance, hadn't considered the need for dual authorization. He'd just asked me to book it. He assumed my mere confirmation was enough. This was my opening. I didn't just ignore the flag, I leveraged it. I typed out a polite, yet firm, email. Subject: urgent. Security protocol. Triggered. Executive boardroom booking. To Barty Higgins, Marcus Thorne, Chloe Davies. CC, IT Security Department. Sterling Corp Legal Department. From Eleanor Vance, Senior Administrative Coordinator. Dear Mr. Higgins, Miss Thorne, and Mr. Davies. This email is to inform you that your requested booking for the executive boardroom at 2 p.m. today has triggered a critical security protocol. The protocol requires dual authorization from both the IT department and the legal department for any bookings of this nature, due to the sensitive classification of information typically discussed in this room. Currently, only one authorization has been submitted. Therefore, the booking cannot be confirmed until the necessary approvals are obtained from both departments. I have notified them directly to expedite this process. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause. I will keep you updated on the progress of the authorization. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance. I hit send. The effect was instantaneous, though not in the way Barty might have expected. There was no immediate angry call. Instead, a palpable silence descended. The usual office chatter seemed to mute. Colleagues, accustomed to my quiet efficiency, exchanged glances. The IT security department and the legal department, alerted by my email, began to stir. Their own systems, now pinging with this unusual request. Then, the real trouble began. The news of the security protocol and the pending authorizations spread through the office grapevine like wildfire. The implication was clear. Whatever Barty, Marcus, and Chloe were planning was so sensitive, so potentially disruptive, that it required special security clearance. The whispers started small, then grew louder. Was it a merger? A hostile takeover? Layoffs? The uncertainty, amplified by the deliberate slowdowns I'd initiated earlier, created an atmosphere of mounting dread. The final piece of my counterplay wasn't a dramatic reveal, but a quiet, almost anticlimactic, administrative action. After sending the email, I made a single, polite call to the legal department. Miss Albright, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a seasoned negotiator. Regarding the executive boardroom booking, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. My understanding from Mr. Higgins was that this meeting was about a strategic realignment of resources. Given the sensitive nature, I thought it prudent to ensure all protocols were followed. However, I have just been informed by the legal department that the proposed realignment, as outlined in the booking request, appears to fall under a section of the employee handbook related to involuntary termination of key personnel without proper procedural documentation. They have therefore placed a temporary hold on the room's availability pending a full review. I hung up the phone before Miss Albright could fully process the implications. The executive boardroom booking was officially on hold. Barty, Marcus, and Chloe were left in limbo, their clandestine meeting thwarted not by a dramatic confrontation, but by a bureaucratic roadblock. The knowledge that their secret coup was now under formal review by legal, and potentially IT, would do more to dismantle their confidence than any direct confrontation could. They had wanted to plot in secret, but I had just painted a giant neon sign above their heads that read, "Suspicious activity under investigation." The trap was sprung. And the architects of the coup were beginning to realize they were caught in their own meticulously constructed web. They were in trouble, and they knew it. But they still had no idea how deep the trouble truly ran, or how I, Eleanor Vance, the quiet administrator, had orchestrated it all. The days that followed my incident report regarding the executive boardroom booking were a testament to the sheer power of institutional inertia when faced with genuine bureaucratic obstacles. Barty, Marcus, and Chloe's clandestine meeting had been spectacularly derailed. The news of the pending review by legal and IT had done more damage to their conspiratorial plans than any leaked memo could have. Morale plummeted, whispers of uncertainty turned into open speculation. The carefully constructed facade of Sterling Corp's unwavering leadership began to crack, revealing the shaky foundation beneath. My own maintenance protocols continued their silent work. The intermittent connectivity issues escalated. Client portals flickered in and out of service. Automated billing systems experienced anomalies that delayed invoices by days. Crucially, the internal HR system, the one Chloe meticulously managed, began to display alarming inconsistencies. Employee records seemed to shuffle, vacation days disappeared, and performance review deadlines inexplicably vanished from calendars. The carefully curated order Chloe prided herself on was dissolving into digital disarray. Then, the inevitable happened. A terse official email landed in my inbox, bypassing Barty's usual demanding tone. Subject: immediate attention required. Outstanding operational issues. To Eleanor Vance. From Office of the CEO. Legal Department. Dear Miss Vance, it has come to our attention that significant operational disruptions are impacting Sterling Corp's daily functions. Client access issues, payroll discrepancies, and significant delays in essential reporting have been reported across multiple departments. Furthermore, your recent booking request for the executive boardroom and the subsequent notification to legal and IT have raised serious concerns. We require an immediate explanation for these actions and their connection to the current systemic failures. Mr. Higgins requests your presence in his office immediately. Failure to comply will result in further disciplinary action. The tone was stark, stripped of Barty's usual bluster, laced with a desperate urgency. They were losing control, and they knew it. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I calmly packed my personal belongings into a small, nondescript box. I retrieved a folder from my desk, not the one containing my meticulously organized evidence, but a simple manila folder labeled "Final Exit." When I arrived at Barty's office, the scene was a tableau of corporate panic. Barty was pacing, his usual sharp suit rumpled. Marcus stood by the window, his slick demeanor replaced by a grim pallor. Chloe sat rigidly in a chair, her face a mask of forced composure. The air crackled with unspoken accusations and a desperate fear. "Eleanor, what the hell is going on?" Barty demanded, his voice strained. "These issues, they're crippling us. And that booking fiasco? What did you do?" I placed my box of belongings on the edge of his imposing mahogany desk. My voice, usually quiet, carried an unexpected weight. "Mr. Higgins, Miss Thorne, Miss Davies. I was asked to book a meeting, a discreet, secret meeting to plan a strategic transition. I booked it, as requested, in the most visible, transparent location available, the Glass House." That was the first step. Marcus scoffed. "That was a mistake, not a plan." "Was it?" I asked, my gaze steady. Because the subsequent disruptions, the payroll delays, the client portal outages, the HR system glitches, those weren't mistakes. They were consequences. Consequences of a system designed for efficiency that was suddenly being run by someone who understood its deepest intricacies, someone who knew precisely where to apply the pressure points. Chloe's eyes narrowed. You're saying you're responsible for this chaos? I'm saying I identified the vulnerabilities they overlooked, I replied calmly. And I ensured that their strategic transition was met with appropriate oversight. I initiated a series of system maintenance protocols designed to flag any unusual activity. When the booking for the executive boardroom was flagged for requiring dual authorization, I ensured that the legal department was fully informed of the potentially illicit nature of the meeting's agenda. They are currently reviewing whether the proposed realignment constitutes unlawful termination or corporate espionage, as per my detailed report. Barty paled. Report? What report? I opened my manila folder. The one detailing your plan. The one outlined in the emails and communications I accidentally archived from your meeting in the glass house. The one detailing your intention to oust the existing board, seize control, and implement your own agenda, all at the expense of the company's current structure and its employees. I slid a few printed emails across the desk. Barty's own words, chillingly clear. This is nothing, Barty stammered, picking up a page with trembling fingers. You can't possibly. Oh, but I can, I interrupted, my voice gaining a steely edge. You wanted to book a secret meeting. I ensured the entire company knew something clandestine was happening. You wanted to transition Sterling Corp. I've ensured that transition will be subject to the full scrutiny of regulatory bodies and internal audits. And now, I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a near whisper. We have two options. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Barty, Marcus, and Chloe stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning horror. Option A, I continued, is that you acknowledge your actions. You resign immediately, effective today. Mr. Higgins will step down as CEO. Miss Thorne as head of marketing. And Miss Davies as head of HR. You will forfeit all stock options and bonuses related to this proposed coup. In return, I will agree not to pursue further legal action or disclose the full extent of your plans to the board or regulatory bodies. Your resignations will be handled quietly, with the narrative being a mutual decision for personal reasons. The operational disruptions will cease immediately, and I will work with IT and legal to restore normal functions. Barty scoffed again, a weak imitation of his former bluster. And option B? My gaze hardened. Option B is that you refuse. In that case, I will present my full dossier, the archived communications, the detailed evidence of your plot, the deliberate manipulation of company systems to cause financial and operational damage, and the fact that you attempted to bypass critical security protocols, to the Sterling Corp board, the SEC, and any relevant regulatory agencies. This will result in immediate termination for cause, significant financial penalties, potential legal charges, and irreparable damage to your reputations. Furthermore, the operational disruptions will continue until every single one of your actions has been fully investigated, which could cripple the company for months. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Barty looked from the printed emails to me, his eyes wide with a desperate calculation. Marcus had gone ashen. Chloe, for the first time, looked genuinely terrified, her carefully constructed composure shattered. Finally, Barty spoke, his voice a raspy whisper. You can't do this. I already have, I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. The decision is yours. Option A, or option B. He looked at Marcus, then at Chloe. Their faces offered no support, only reflected his own mounting dread. With a defeated sigh, Barty slumped back in his chair. Option A, he mumbled, the words tasting like ash. We choose. Option A. The aftermath was swift and surgical. By the end of the day, the official company announcement was disseminated. Bartholomew Higgins, Marcus Thorne, and Chloe Davies were stepping down from their positions due to irreconcilable differences regarding future company strategy. There was no mention of the coup, no hint of the impending legal scrutiny. My carefully orchestrated operational disruptions ceased as abruptly as they had begun, leaving the company to quickly recover its equilibrium. I didn't get a promotion, not officially. But as the dust settled, a new interim CEO was appointed. Someone I'd quietly backed with my knowledge of the company's inner workings. Someone who valued competence over charisma. My administrative title remained, but my responsibilities expanded. I became the de facto guardian of Sterling Corp's operational integrity, the quiet force ensuring that such blatant abuses of power would never gain traction again. My decade of unappreciated diligence had culminated not in a pink slip, but in a quiet, definitive victory. Barty, Marcus, and Chloe disappeared from Sterling Corp, their careers in tatters, their arrogance, their undoing. They had underestimated the power of the overlooked, the quiet administrator who meticulously documented everything, who understood the system not just from the top down, but from the inside out. As I packed my remaining belongings into my box, I glanced around Barty's now empty office. The view of the city skyline, once a symbol of corporate ambition, now just looked like a collection of tall buildings. My work here, the quiet revolution I'd orchestrated, was complete. I didn't need a corner office or a fancy title. I had something far more valuable, the satisfaction of knowing that I had exposed their hubris and dismantled their conspiracy with nothing more than my understanding of bureaucracy and a well-placed email. If you enjoyed watching corporate arrogance crumble under the weight of meticulous planning and bureaucratic might, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales of quiet competence triumphing over loud ambition. Because sometimes, the most satisfying revenge isn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing exactly where to pull the strings. And as for Barty and his cronies, they learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the administrator, especially when they've been keeping notes.
The smell of stale coffee and desperation. That was the prevailing aroma in the third-floor hallway of Sterling Corp each Monday morning. For 15 years, it was my personal perfume. My name's Eleanor Vance. And for 15 years, I was the quiet hum beneath the roar of Sterling's supposed innovation. I was the one who made sure the lights stayed on, the servers stayed humming, and, crucially, that the executive team didn't sound like complete buffoons when they stood on stage. My title? Senior Operations Coordinator, which, in Sterling Corp speak, meant I was the janitor of their ambitions, the glue that held their rickety, ego-driven structure together with sheer, unacknowledged effort. You see, Sterling wasn't built on groundbreaking ideas. It was built on buzzwords, borrowed confidence, and the relentless ambition of men who wore their success like ill-fitting suits. They'd strut around in their Italian leather shoes, clutching their artisanal water bottles, convinced they were titans of industry. They were, in reality, just very well-dressed toddlers with access to corporate credit cards. And I was the nanny, the one who knew where the hidden tantrums were, which pacifiers to deploy, and, most importantly, how to make sure their public performances didn't devolve into a full-blown meltdown. My domain wasn't the executive suite. It wasn't the sleek, glass-walled conference rooms where billion-dollar decisions were apparently made over lukewarm cappuccinos. No, my territory was a beige box of an office tucked away near the server room, smelling faintly of ozone and WD-40. It was a place where actual work happened, meticulously organized, documented, and, most importantly, silent. My desk was a testament to functional chaos. Stacked binders, labeled with arcane abbreviations, a meticulously maintained spreadsheet detailing every single piece of equipment down to the last paper clip, and a shrine to my trusty teleprompter system. Ah, the teleprompter, Sterling's digital umbilical cord to perceived competence. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of job that got you quoted in Forbes or invited to speak at TED. It was the invisible scaffolding, the behind-the-scenes wizardry that made the illusion of effortless leadership possible. I was the alchemist who turned rambling executives into polished orators. I was the maestro who ensured the symphony of corporate jargon played in perfect, albeit nonsensical harmony. I knew every CEO's verbal tic, every VP's tendency to trail off into a nonsensical anecdote, every junior executive's desperate attempt to sound knowledgeable by peppering their speech with the latest industry buzzwords. My job was to make them sound good, to mask the cracks, smooth the rough edges, and ensure the narrative they presented to the board was a seamless, impressive tapestry of success. And I was good at it. God, I was good. For 15 years, I'd listened to speeches that would make a poet weep with despair, and I'd coaxed them, nudged them, and subtly rephrased them into something that sounded almost profound. I'd spent countless hours in darkened rooms, eyes glued to the teleprompter screen, my fingers dancing on the keyboard, adjusting the pace, the wording, the flow. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent co-author of every triumphant presentation. I knew the rhythm of their egos better than they did. I knew the insecurities they tried to hide, the jargon they used to compensate, the hollow promises they made, and I knew how to make it all sound like pure genius. The current architect of Sterling's hubris was a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne. The name itself dripped with a self-importance that could curdle milk. He joined Sterling 2 years ago, a peacock in human form, all dazzling pronouncements, and a smile that was as genuine as a $3 bill. He was the epitome of the modern executive, fluent in the language of disruption, innovation, and synergy, but utterly clueless about the actual mechanics of how any of it worked. He saw Sterling not as a company, but as his personal stepping stone to a bigger, shinier office with a better view. Thorne's modus operandi was simple. Take credit for everyone else's work, repackage it with enough buzzwords to sound revolutionary, and then blame anyone who dared question him. He'd inherited a stable, if somewhat uninspired, company. He'd managed to inject a potent dose of chaos and self-congratulation into its bloodstream. He was a master of the PowerPoint presentation, a virtuoso of the executive summary, and a complete novice at actual leadership. And, like all his predecessors, he relied on me. He had no idea how much. He thought my role was simply to man the teleprompter, a glorified button pusher. He saw me as a piece of functional office equipment, like the fancy espresso machine in the executive lounge that only he knew how to operate. He'd swoop in minutes before a major board presentation, barking instructions, often changing slides at the last minute, convinced his improvisational genius was key. And I, Eleanor Vance, the quiet hum, the invisible backbone, would adapt. I'd rewrite sentences on the fly, reroute his rambling tangents, and ensure that despite his erratic performance, the message that reached the board was polished, professional, and, crucially, made him look good. This morning, however, was different. This morning, the smell of stale coffee was mixed with the distinct aroma of betrayal. I was called into the HR office at 8:05 a.m. Thorne was there, of course, perched on the edge of his expensive chair like a hawk ready to strike. With him was a new face, a stern-looking woman with a power suit so sharp it could slice steel. Her name tag read Brenda Albright, Senior HR Business Partner. Albright. Another one. They always sent the ones with the coldest smiles. Eleanor, Thorne began, his voice dripping with a mock solemnity that made my teeth ache. We're making some strategic adjustments to streamline our operations. Streamline. That's corporate speak for get rid of someone they deem unnecessary. My stomach did a slow, cold flip. 15 years. 15 years of late nights, early mornings, crisis management, and quiet competence. 15 years of saving Thorne and his ilk from their own verbal incompetence. Brenda Albright slid a thick, generic-looking envelope across the polished mahogany desk. It landed with a soft thud, a sound far too insignificant for the seismic shift it represented. This outlines your severance package, Eleanor, she stated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion, and the terms of your separation agreement. I didn't touch the envelope. My gaze was fixed on Thorne, who was now straightening his tie with an air of self-satisfaction that was truly nauseating. He looked relieved, like he'd just successfully amputated a limb that was no longer serving his aesthetic. I don't understand, I said, my voice remarkably steady. Streamline? My department is streamlined. I handle all executive presentations, technical support, IT liaison for the C-suite, and facilities oversight. What exactly is being streamlined? Thorne chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. Eleanor, your role, while appreciated, has become somewhat redundant with the integration of new AI-powered presentation software. It's all very cutting edge, much more efficient, AI-powered software. The same software that Thorne himself had complained was too clunky and lacked human nuance just last week during his pre-board prep. The same software I'd patiently walked him through troubleshooting for an hour, only for him to throw his hands up and demand I use the old teleprompter because it was more reliable. Redundant? My entire job was built on being the unseen human element that made their tech look good. The AI software. I repeated slowly. A small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. The one that still struggles to distinguish between a noun and an adjective and crashes every time you try to insert a custom graphic. Thorne's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Brenda Albright shot me a warning glance. Eleanor, the agreement, she prompted, her voice hardening. Of course, I said, my gaze still locked on Thorne. The agreement. It says I need to return all company property upon termination, correct? That's standard procedure, Thorne confirmed, eager to move past my inconvenient questions. Keys, badge, laptop, any company devices. I nodded. And it also stipulates that all company intellectual property remains with the company, of course. Naturally, Thorne said, his eyes flicking towards the envelope, desperate for me to just sign and disappear. Now, if you could just, including all custom software configurations, unique operational protocols, and proprietary scripts, developed for the sole purpose of enhancing executive presentation delivery. I finished, my voice still deceptively calm. Thorne paused. Brenda Albright's pen, which had been poised over a document, froze mid-air. A flicker of something, confusion, crossed Thorne's face. "What proprietary scripts, Eleanor?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to wary. "Oh, you know," I said, leaning forward slightly, enjoying the subtle shift in power. "The ones that take your rambling thoughts about synergistic disruption and turn them into coherent sentences. The ones that identify your tendency to repeat leverage 3 times in one breath and subtly rephrase it. The ones that ensure your groundbreaking ideas actually sound groundbreaking even when they're just rehashed concepts from a 1,990 seconds business journal." Thorne's face was slowly draining of its colour. He was starting to look less like a titan and more like a startled meerkat. I don't understand what you're talking about." "You don't need to," I said, my voice taking on a harder edge. "You just need to know that those scripts, those configurations, those subtle algorithmic nudges that make you sound like you know what you're talking about, they're not company property. Not technically." Brenda Albright's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, not technically?" "I mean," I said, standing up, the movement slow and deliberate. The beige office suddenly felt a lot less claustrophobic. "That I wrote them on my own time, using my own equipment. And they are, in essence, my intellectual property, custom built to manage your specific presentation deficiencies." Thorne sputtered. "That's absurd. You are an operations coordinator." "And you," I countered, my gaze sharp, "are a CEO who has relied on me to read your lines for the last 5 years. You think that AI software is going to magically make you sound good without the underlying architecture that understands your particular brand of corporate nonsense? It won't, because that architecture is in my head and on my drives." I reached into my sensible but clearly underestimated briefcase and pulled out a single plain manila folder. It was thin, unassuming, almost forgettable. Exactly like me, they'd thought. "So," I continued, letting the silence hang in the air, thick with Thorne's dawning horror. "When you ask for all company property back, I'll happily return your badge, your laptop, and the keys to the server room. But those scripts, those custom teleprompter programs that have made you shine for the past half-decade, those are mine, and I'm not giving them back." I let that sink in, watching the panic bloom on Thorne's face like a particularly virulent strain of corporate mold. He had just fired the one person who knew how to make him look like he wasn't a complete fraud. He had just threatened the very mechanism that allowed him to present his hollow pronouncements to the board. He'd kicked over the anthill without realizing he was standing in the middle of it. "You can't do this," Thorne finally stammered, his voice a pathetic whine. "Oh, but I can," I said, my smile widening. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found the perfect weapon, crafted from years of silent observation and utter contempt. "Because you see, Marcus, you didn't just fire an employee, you just fired your script writer. And the next time you stand before that board, you'll be speaking from pure, unadulterated, improvisational chaos. Enjoy." I turned and walked out, leaving Thorne and Albright in the suffocating silence of their own making. The hallway air, usually thick with desperation, now smelled surprisingly fresh, like opportunity, like the dawn of a very, very satisfying reckoning. They thought they'd seen the last of Eleanor Vance. They were wrong. They had only just seen the opening act. The real show was about to begin, and it was going to be spectacular. The walk from HR back to my quiet beige office felt longer than usual. It wasn't the walk itself, but the thoughts racing through my head, each one a carefully placed brick in the foundation of my coming response. Marcus Thorne and Brenda Albright believed they had neatly concluded a minor operational adjustment. They saw a dismissed employee. I saw a CEO who had just declared war on the very mechanism that made him appear competent. The severance agreement lay unsigned on Thorne's desk, a forgotten promise of closure. Closure, however, wasn't my immediate objective. My objective was justice, delivered with the cold, precise efficiency of a well-programmed algorithm. Back in my domain, the air, usually thick with the hum of servers and the faint scent of ozone, felt charged with potential. The blinds were drawn, casting the room in a dim, focused light. My desk, a monument to organized chaos, became my command center. The manila folder I'd presented to Thorne wasn't just a statement. It was a declaration of intent. Inside, it contained the meticulously organized fruits of 15 years of quiet observation and even quieter development. My proprietary scripts weren't merely text files. They were dynamic frameworks, written in a specialized scripting language I'd adapted over years. They analyzed Thorne's speech patterns in real time, identifying his favorite cliches, his repetitive phrasing, his tendency to pivot away from difficult questions. They then subtly rephrased, reordered, and injected more impactful vocabulary, words I'd painstakingly compiled from successful board presentations, from speeches that had actually moved markets. It was predictive text on steroids, personalized for a CEO who'd never truly learned to write his own speeches. But the scripts were only one layer. Underneath them lay a sophisticated data logging system. Every presentation Thorne had ever given, every rehearsal, every change he'd demanded at the last minute was recorded. Not just the audio, but the teleprompter feed, the exact timing of his words, the pauses, the stumbles. I had logs of system access, of his late-night, often incoherent requests for urgent revisions, all meticulously time-stamped and cross-referenced. I'd even managed to integrate a small, unobtrusive audio capture module into the teleprompter itself, logging his off-the-cuff remarks, his complaints about my efficiency, his boasts about his own supposed genius. The data was immense, a digital tapestry of his inflated ego and my silent labor. My first move was subtle, almost imperceptible. I didn't unleash a digital onslaught. Instead, I began by meticulously documenting the absence of my specialized touch. I initiated a phased decommissioning of my custom scripts and monitoring tools, a process I'd pre-programmed months ago, disguised as routine system maintenance. The primary teleprompter system was my masterpiece, but Sterling Corp also utilized a suite of supporting software I'd configured. This included their internal document management system, where all executive presentations were stored, and a proprietary analytics dashboard that tracked presentation effectiveness and board engagement. The day after my termination, a critical board meeting was scheduled. Thorne was slated to present Sterling's Q4 performance and unveil his bold new Synergy Acceleration initiative. He'd been rehearsing for weeks, relying on my usual late-night tweaks and prompts. Now, there was no Eleanor. The first domino fell on Tuesday morning. Thorne, scheduled to prep for his Q4 presentation at 9 a.m., found the teleprompter system unresponsive. Not crashed, not frozen, just silent. The usual boot-up sequence didn't initiate. His IT support, a junior technician named Kevin, who was still learning to distinguish a router from a toaster oven, was baffled. Thorne predictably exploded. He barked orders, threatening Kevin with reassignment to the mailroom if he didn't fix it immediately. Kevin, sweating profusely, fumbled through troubleshooting guides, but the system remained inert. My custom bootloader, designed to activate only with my specific biometric authentication, had initiated a deep sleep mode. The system was, for all intents and purposes, bricked. By lunchtime, Thorne's frustration had escalated. He demanded a hard copy of the presentation script. Kevin, panicking, dug out an outdated draft from the shared drive. It was riddled with Thorne's original, unpolished rambling. The Synergy Acceleration initiative, which I had painstakingly rephrased into a compelling narrative of market dominance, now read like a high school student's desperate attempt at a persuasive essay. The buzzwords were there, but the coherence, the persuasive flow, the impact, it was all gone. Word travels fast in a corporate environment, especially when the CEO is losing his mind. My old colleagues, many of whom I'd shared countless late nights with, started reaching out. My phone buzzed incessantly with tentative texts. Eleanor, is everything okay? Thorne's having a meltdown? The teleprompter's dead? Heard you got reassigned? The Q4 presentation is a disaster. He's just spewing nonsense. Is it true you did something to the system? Because it's not working for anyone. I replied cryptically, or not at all. My focus was on the next phase. While Thorne was battling his defunct teleprompter, I was remotely disabling access to the presentation analytics dashboard. This wasn't a brute force attack. It was a quiet revocation of access credentials tied to the very systems I had architected and managed. The dashboard, which provided Thorne with real-time feedback on board engagement, things like attention spans, points of confusion, moments of genuine interest, was now inaccessible. He relied on it to gauge his performance and adjust his delivery. Without it, he was flying blind. Then came the second domino. The Synergy Acceleration initiative was supposed to be presented to a key group of potential investors later that week. This wasn't just a board meeting. This was a high-stakes demonstration of Sterling's future. Thorne, desperate, had tried to cobble together a presentation using generic templates and his own fragmented notes. The result was a chaotic mess. He'd even tried to pull up some older slides from my archive, forgetting that my systems had also been responsible for organizing and tagging them. Without my AI-driven indexing, they were now just a jumbled folder of digital detritus. He couldn't find the specific data points he needed, the compelling case studies I had meticulously curated, the strategic projections that had taken months to refine. The whispers turned into a low hum of panic. Emails, usually reserved for company-wide announcements, began circulating internally, couched in corporate euphemisms. Subject: urgent update, IT system optimization. Team: due to unforeseen system integrations, access to certain presentation tools and data dashboards may be temporarily unavailable. We are working diligently to restore full functionality. We appreciate your understanding. It was signed by Brenda Albright, HR. A classic deflection. She was trying to manage the fallout, but Thorne's escalating incompetence was becoming impossible to contain. The real trap, the one I'd been setting for years, wasn't just about disabling systems. It was about leverage. Thorne had a habit of signing off on vendor contracts, often with little scrutiny, especially if they promised innovation or efficiency. I had meticulously catalogued every such contract, every approval, every payment authorization that crossed my desk, often because Thorne had misplaced them or needed me to just process it quickly. Many of these vendors had integrations with Sterling's core operational software I had full administrative access to. My single precise move came on Wednesday morning. I didn't send a threat. I didn't make a demand. Instead, I drafted a polite, carefully worded email. Subject: inquiry regarding vendor service agreements. Sterling Corp. 2. Vendor Relations Department, Sterling Corp. General Counsel, Sterling Corp. Marcus Thorne, CEO, Sterling Corp. Brenda Albright, Senior HR Business Partner, Sterling Corp. Dear Vendor Relations Team, I am writing to inquire about the status of several critical vendor service agreements that were due for renewal or review within the past 90 days. Specifically, I am seeking confirmation on the agreements with Vendor A, specializing in proprietary presentation enhancement software, Vendor B, provider of real-time engagement analytics, and Vendor C, key infrastructure support for executive presentation suites. My inquiry stems from the recent operational review and my personal role in ensuring the seamless integration and oversight of these vital tools. Any information regarding their current status or any outstanding contractual obligations would be greatly appreciated. I am particularly interested in any amendments or termination clauses that may have been enacted. Thank you for your prompt attention to this matter. Sincerely, Eleanor Vance, formerly Senior Operations Coordinator. I didn't even hit send immediately. I waited. I waited until Thorne had completed his disastrous Q4 presentation, which he delivered with flailing hands and a hollow voice, relying on a printout that looked like a ransom note. I waited until reports of his volatile outbursts and the sheer ineptitude of his presentation were circulating like wildfire. I waited until the board members, usually a placid audience, were exchanging worried glances. Then I hit send. The effect was immediate and profound. The Vendor Relations Department, a typically sleepy corner of Sterling Corp, was suddenly inundated with panicked calls from the vendors themselves. Vendor A, the company providing the core teleprompter software, immediately flagged Thorne's account as being in a suspended state due to non-payment and lack of authorization. Vendor B, the analytics provider, confirmed their service was terminated last week due to a lapse in contract renewal, a lapse I had ensured by subtly delaying the processing of the renewal paperwork months ago, claiming it needed Thorne's final sign-off, which never came. Vendor C, the infrastructure provider, flagged that their contract had expired and had not been renewed, putting the entire executive presentation suite at risk of complete shutdown. The carefully constructed facade of Sterling Corp's operational efficiency was beginning to crumble. The board, initially concerned about Thorne's presentation, now had a much larger, more systemic problem. They saw not just a poor presentation, but a company-wide operational failure, a gaping hole where critical infrastructure should have been. And the email, CCing Thorne, Albright, and the General Counsel pointed directly to the source of their new terrifying realization, the woman they had so carelessly dismissed. They knew I was the cause. They knew the systems had failed. What they didn't yet understand was the depth of my knowledge, the extent of my control, and the fact that their current crisis was merely the overture to a symphony of their own making. They were in trouble, big trouble. The hum of my laptop was the loudest sound in my apartment. Days had passed since I sent that email, the silence from Sterling Corp. It had been deafening, punctuated only by snippets of frantic gossip I received from my old colleagues. The board was in an uproar. Thorne was reportedly a wreck, oscillating between furious denials and desperate pleas for answers. Brenda Albright, the HR Iron Fist, was nowhere to be seen, likely lost in a sea of damage control. The company's stock had dipped, a minor tremor, but a clear signal. They knew it was me, but they still didn't know how much. The call came at 9:17 a.m. on a Thursday, exactly 1 week after my termination. The caller ID displayed a blocked number. I let it ring, enjoying the tension, then picked up. Eleanor Vance speaking. A strained, breathy voice came through the line. It was Sterling's General Counsel, Mr. Sterling, the man who had always struck me as more of a paperweight than a lawyer. His usual measured tone was replaced by a palpable desperation. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice tight, We need to talk. Urgently." "About what, Mr. Sterling?" I asked, my voice deliberately calm, betraying none of the satisfaction I felt. "My severance agreement? I'm sure HR has all the necessary paperwork." He practically sputtered. No, it's about the system failures, the vendor contracts, the whole situation." He paused, gathering himself. "Marcus he's authorized me to reach out. He's willing to discuss terms." "Terms?" I echoed, a slow smile spreading across my face. "My termination was handled with utmost professionalism, Mr. Sterling. I was given my notice and a severance package. What else is there to discuss?" "This is not about your severance, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "This is about everything. The presentations, the data, the infrastructure. It's all malfunctioning. And frankly, we suspect your unique configurations are involved." "Ah," So they suspected. Good. But suspicion wasn't knowledge. My configurations, I mused, leaning back in my chair. I'm afraid I don't understand. I was simply an operations coordinator. My tasks were routine. Routine tasks that seemed to have crippled our entire executive communication infrastructure, he countered, his tone bordering on accusatory, then immediately backtracking. Look, Miss Vance, we're in a crisis. The board is demanding answers. Investors are pulling out. Thorne is not in a good place. He's authorized me to explore all options to rectify this situation. He's willing to be flexible. Flexible, I repeated, tasting the word. That sounds promising. I decided it was time to present the options. I wanted him to understand the full scope of their predicament. Mr. Sterling, you mentioned Thorne is willing to be flexible. That's a good start, because I see two paths forward from here, and I'd like to lay them out for you quite clearly. I took a slow sip of my tea, letting the silence hang. This was it. The end game. Path A, I began, my voice steady, involves a swift and discreet resolution. For Sterling Corp, this means Thorne's immediate resignation, effective immediately. He would be issued a mutually agreed upon statement, framing it as a strategic leadership transition to focus on new ventures. In exchange for his dignified exit, he would sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and I would remotely restore full functionality to all Sterling systems. My custom scripts, my data logs, my proprietary enhancements, all returned to your purview. The vendor contracts would be reinstated and all outstanding issues resolved. This path requires your cooperation and Thorne's willing departure. Mr. Sterling was silent for a moment, his breathing heavy. Resignation? That's a significant request. It's a request that aligns with the severity of the situation, I replied. Thorne's actions, or rather his inactions, have demonstrably endangered the company's operations and reputation. This is the path of least resistance, the cleanest exit for everyone involved, including the board and the shareholders. I paused, letting that sink in. Then there's Path B. This is the nuclear option, Mr. Sterling. If Thorne refuses to resign, or if Sterling Corp chooses not to cooperate with Path A, I will have no choice but to proceed with a full disclosure of all the data I have meticulously collected over 15 years. This includes detailed logs of Thorne's incompetence, his misstatements to the board, his unauthorized use of company resources, and, most critically, the proprietary nature of his supposed innovations. Furthermore, I have ensured that my intellectual property, specifically the custom scripts and configurations that actually make your presentation systems function, have been legally secured. The clause in my employment agreement regarding IP reversion upon termination without cause is ironclad. This means I legally own the underlying architecture of your executive presentation suite. Path B would involve not just Thorne's public downfall, but potentially significant legal and financial repercussions for Sterling Corp. Think regulatory inquiries, investor lawsuits, and a substantial financial settlement to me for the unauthorized use and retention of my intellectual property. A settlement that would far exceed any reasonable severance. I let that sink in. So, Mr. Sterling, your choice is clear. A quiet, controlled transition with Thorne's resignation and the return of my systems, or a public, chaotic implosion that will tarnish Sterling Corp's reputation for years to come. And the terms of my intellectual property ownership will be upheld one way or another. The silence on the other end was even heavier this time. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his legal mind, calculating the probabilities, the risks, the sheer magnitude of Thorne's screw-up. We need time to discuss this with the board, he finally stammered. Of course, I said. You have 24 hours. After that, the systems will begin to permanently lock down and my disclosures will be filed. I trust you'll make the prudent decision. The 24 hours were agonizing for Sterling Corp, I'm sure. For me, they were simply a period of calm anticipation. I knew they'd choose path A. Thorne's ego, while vast, was ultimately outmatched by his fear of utter public humiliation and financial ruin. True to my prediction, the call came the next morning, precisely 23 hours and 50 minutes after our initial conversation. It was Mr. Sterling again. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier strain, replaced by a weary resignation. "The board has convened. Marcus Thorne has agreed to your terms. His resignation is being drafted as we speak. A statement will be released shortly, and we're ready to proceed with the system reinstatement." "Excellent," I replied. "Please have your IT department prepare for remote access to the executive presentation suite. I will initiate the process within the hour." Later that afternoon, I initiated the restoration sequence. It wasn't a single command, but a carefully orchestrated series of scripts designed to re-establish access and reintegrate my enhancements. The teleprompter flickered to life, the analytics dashboard reappeared, the document management system resumed its smooth operation. It was as if I'd never left, save for the conspicuous absence of Marcus Thorne's name from the CEO's office. The official announcement was discreet as promised. Marcus Thorne was stepping down to pursue new entrepreneurial opportunities. The stock dipped slightly, then stabilized. The press release was bland, corporate boilerplate. No one in the wider world knew the true story of how a CEO's hubris and a loyal employee's quiet competence had brought Sterling Corp to the brink. But the impact was felt within the company. Thorne was gone. His legacy of inflated pronouncements and technical reliance was erased. The board, humbled and keenly aware of their near disaster, began an internal audit of their executive oversight processes. Brenda Albright was quietly reassigned to a less visible role, her reputation as a ruthless HR enforcer severely tarnished by her complicity in Thorne's downfall. My part in this was complete. I received a modest but significant sum as compensation for the IP settlement, a fraction of what I could have demanded, but enough to secure my comfortable retirement. No reinstatement, no public praise. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to dismantle the arrogance, to prove that true value often lies hidden, and that those who dismiss the quiet operators do so at their own peril. My apartment, once filled with the scent of stale coffee and desperation, now held the aroma of freedom and a quiet, profound satisfaction. My 15 years at Sterling Corp had been a masterclass in invisibility, a testament to the power of quiet competence. They fired me, thinking they were trimming the fat. Instead, they'd severed the main artery. As I watched the news report on Sterling Corp's seemingly stable future, I poured myself a celebratory glass of wine. They believed they had moved on. They were wrong. They had merely been removed. If watching corporate hubris meet its match and the quiet power of meticulous planning unfold ignites something in you, consider liking this video and subscribing for more tales of the underestimated winning. And that, Mr. Thorne, is how you get written out of the script permanently.
The hum of the office was a familiar lullaby, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that grinds. It was the sound of 1,000 tiny frustrations echoing through fluorescent-lit halls, the symphony of mediocrity conducted by a committee of out-of-touch executives. And I was usually the quiet stagehand, making sure the lights didn't flicker and the backdrops didn't fall. My name is Sarah Jenkins, and for 12 years, I'd been the unseen architect of the data that ran this place. I wasn't the one charming investors or high-fiving at the water cooler. I was the one who made sure the water cooler actually had water, metaphorically speaking. I was the one who wrangled rogue spreadsheets, unearthed forgotten trends, and turned mountains of raw numbers into the crystal-clear insights that kept this whole circus from collapsing into a heap of bad decisions and even worse coffee. My domain was the third floor, a beige purgatory of cubicles where the air conditioning always seemed to be fighting a losing battle with the collective body heat of stressed-out analysts. My desk was a testament to organized chaos, a dual-monitor setup that could track every project simultaneously, a meticulously organized stack of research papers, and a surprisingly robust collection of artisanal teas. Most importantly, it was where the digital keys to the kingdom resided, access to databases, analytics platforms, and the encrypted repositories of what this company actually knew about itself. The CEO, a man named Bartholomew Vance, was a legend in his own mind. He had a penchant for buzzwords, a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and a tailor who clearly charged by the square inch of expensive fabric. He saw himself as a visionary, a titan of industry steering us through choppy waters with his unwavering confidence and his perfectly knotted Windsor tie. The reality was, he was more of a captain who shouted orders from the bridge while the actual engineers were below deck, covered in grease, keeping the engines from exploding. And I, Sarah Jenkins, was one of those engineers. The air today felt particularly thick with impending doom, the kind you get before a company-wide announcement that always sounds like good news, but usually translates to, we're cutting corners and someone's job is on the line. The whispers had been circulating for weeks. Rumors of a strategic realignment, a synergy initiative, and the usual corporate jargon designed to sound progressive while masking deep-seated anxiety. Then came the email. A calendar invite for a quarterly performance review and strategic outlook meeting. Subject: Key stakeholder session. Urgent. The attendees list read like a who's who of the executive suite. Vance himself, his perpetually tanned head of marketing, Brenda Sterling, whose primary contribution seemed to be generating aesthetically pleasing but ultimately meaningless social media campaigns, David Chen, the chief financial officer, who spoke in numbers that always seemed to be either falling or inexplicably rising, and a few other suits whose titles were as interchangeable as their beige power suits. My name was not on the list. Not even as a secondary attendee. Not even as a requested viewer. Nothing. It was a deliberate omission, a calculated snub that felt like a cold, wet dish rag slapped across my face. I, the one who compiled the Q2 sales projections that Vance had proudly presented as his own genius foresight, the one who'd flagged the potential Q3 supply chain bottleneck that saved us millions, the one who painstakingly built the very dashboards they used to pretend they understood the business. I was excluded. It wasn't the first time my contributions had been sidelined, my expertise treated as a background hum rather than the engine it was. But this was different. This was a clear message. I was no longer deemed a key stakeholder. My role, crucial as it was deemed unglamorous, perhaps even expendable. I stared at the empty space on my calendar where the meeting should have been. It was like looking into a void. A void that screamed, "You are not important enough." The silence in my cubicle, usually a sanctuary, suddenly felt oppressive, suffocating. The keyboards clacked around me, oblivious. Brenda Sterling was probably prepping her latest Synergy Number Innovation hashtag. Chen was likely polishing his EBITDA figures. And Vance? He was probably rehearsing his keynote speech, filled with more empty promises than a politician on election day. I took a deep breath, trying to push down the sudden clench of anxiety in my chest. Anger would come later. Right now, it was about assessment. This wasn't about hurt feelings, it was about professional protocol. Exclusion from a meeting concerning strategic outlook for a quarter I was directly responsible for analyzing was more than just rude, it was fundamentally unprofessional. It was a breach of the unwritten rules of how a functioning business operates. I leaned back in my chair, the worn fabric sighing under my weight. 12 years. 12 years of late nights, of deciphering cryptic data points, of building systems that were so seamless, so integrated, that people forgot they were there. I was the digital equivalent of the foundation of a skyscraper. Nobody noticed it until the whole damn thing started to lean. My gaze drifted to a small, almost forgotten sticky note on the corner of my monitor. It was a relic from a particularly frustrating internal audit years ago, a reminder of a specific compliance clause I'd unearthed and championed. It read, "Reminder, all critical strategic proposals require documented data analysis sign-off from Data Integrity Lead. Protocol 7. B. Do not bypass. Protocol 7. B." A clause so obscure, so buried in the corporate labyrinth, that most people probably assumed it was a suggestion. But I knew better. I'd spent days fighting to get it implemented, to ensure that decisions weren't made on a whim or a gut feeling, but on solid, verifiable data. And I was the designated Data Integrity Lead, a title that sounded rather grand for someone whose main task was ensuring the numbers didn't lie. I opened my internal calendar, the one that Vance and his ilk never saw. I navigated to the date and time of the key stakeholder session. The empty slot stared back at me. Then, with a deliberate slowness, I clicked on it. A small dialog box appeared. "New event," I typed. "Follow-up memo, strategic outlook meeting, data analysis and compliance review." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. The actual meeting had already happened. The decisions, whatever they were, had been made. But the crucial step, the one that ensured those decisions were data-backed and compliant, hadn't. And according to Protocol 7B, it needed to happen. I saved the event. It was a placeholder, a digital breadcrumb, a quiet statement that the process, for me, was not yet complete. I then opened a new document, titled it, "Strategic Outlook Meeting, Post-Session Analysis, Draft." I began typing, not with anger, but with the dispassionate precision of a surgeon. I documented the meeting that had occurred without me. I noted the topics that were likely discussed based on the pre-meeting agenda I'd received as a general employee, not as a key stakeholder. I cross-referenced these with the current operational data, the sales figures, the market trends I had been monitoring. I began to construct the actual data analysis, the one that was supposed to have happened before any decisions were finalized. The irony was almost too rich. They excluded me from the meeting, assuming I was just a functionary, a cog in the machine. They didn't realize that the cog was intricately connected to the engine, and without its proper function, the whole mechanism would eventually seize. Protocol 7B wasn't just about data, it was about accountability. And accountability, Vance and his ilk seemed to have forgotten, was a two-way street. I wasn't fired, not yet. Not in the traditional sense. I was simply sidestepped, left on the periphery. But in the world of corporate justice, sometimes being left on the outside looking in is the most powerful position to be in. Because from there, you can see the cracks, you can see the flaws in the foundation, and you can meticulously plan your next move, not with emotion, but with cold, hard logic. The clock on my screen ticked past 5 p.m. The office began to empty, the sounds of hurried goodbyes and the rumble of elevators filling the void. Most people were eager to escape the fluorescent hum. I, on the other hand, was just getting started. I closed the document, saved it, and then did something that felt both profound and utterly normal. I packed my bag. Not with the urgency of someone fleeing, but with the calm deliberation of someone who knew they would be back, or, perhaps more accurately, that the consequences of their departure would follow them. As I walked out of the building, the evening air felt surprisingly crisp. It was the kind of air that felt clean, unburdened by the recycled anxiety of office politics. I didn't shed a tear. I didn't feel a pang of sadness for the years I'd poured into this place. Instead, I felt a quiet, steely resolve. They had made their mistake. They had underestimated the power of the quiet analyst in the beige cubicle, the keeper of the inconvenient truths. And soon, very soon, Bartholomew Vance and his gaggle of buzzword-slinging executives were going to realize that forgetting to include someone in a meeting was a lot like forgetting to check if the brakes on your car were working. It's a small oversight with potentially catastrophic consequences. And I, Sarah Jenkins, the now uninvited data integrity lead, had just put the keys to the ignition in my pocket. This wasn't the end. It was the preamble. The slow, deliberate winding up of a very precise, very corporate clock. Let the games begin. The next morning, the office hummed with its usual insincere optimism. Vance, no doubt, was strutting through the halls, high-fiving himself for his strategic brilliance. Brenda Sterling was probably already crafting Instagram captions about the new dawn of the company, while David Chen was probably buried under spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the cost of Vance's ego with the company's bottom line. They were operating under the illusion that the critical decisions had been made, that the future was secure, all thanks to their insightful data-driven meeting. Little did they know, the data itself was about to stage a rebellion. For me, Sarah Jenkins, the day began not with the frantic rush of an office worker, but with the calm, methodical preparation of a chess grandmaster. My home office, a stark contrast to the beige purgatory I'd left behind, was my command center. The aroma of freshly brewed Earl Grey, a stark improvement on the instant sludge at the office, filled the air. My dual monitors glowed, not with corporate dashboards, but with meticulously organized digital folders. This wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. About ensuring that the process, the one Vance and his cronies had so gleefully bypassed, was enforced. I'd spent the evening meticulously documenting everything. Every email I'd sent regarding Q3 projections, every data anomaly report flagged, every warning I'd issued about potential supply chain disruptions, all carefully timestamped and cross-referenced. I had copies of my analyses, my risk assessments, my recommendations. These weren't just files on a hard drive, they were the ammunition. The digital equivalent of a tactical strike plan, ready to be deployed with surgical precision. And then there was Protocol 7B, that obscure, almost mythical clause I'd fought so hard to implement. I pulled up the original documentation, the internal memo that had codified it. All critical strategic proposals required documented data analysis sign-off from Data Integrity Lead. Protocol 7. B. Do not bypass. I'd even created a small, almost unnoticeable watermark on the digital copy of the meeting minutes from last year's quarterly review, a subtle, almost imperceptible data analysis pending sign-off stamp that only became visible under certain light conditions. A digital fingerprint, a whisper of oversight. The first domino fell, not with a bang, but with a polite yet firm email. It was sent to Vance, Brenda, David, and the rest of the executive attendees. Subject: Follow-up. Regarding Q4 Strategic Outlook Meeting, Protocol 7, B, Compliance. Dear team, it began, my tone as neutral and professional as a seasoned diplomat. Further to the Strategic Outlook meeting held yesterday, I am completing the required data analysis and compliance review as mandated by Protocol 7b. My findings indicate several critical strategic proposals discussed may benefit from further data validation before final implementation. Specifically, concerning the projected market penetration strategy for the new product line and the proposed allocation of resources for the XYZ initiative, my analysis suggests potential risks that were not fully addressed due to the absence of comprehensive data review prior to decision-making. I attached my painstakingly compiled report. It wasn't accusatory, it was factual. It laid out the data, the projected outcomes based on my analysis, and highlighted the discrepancies between their assumed success and the statistical probabilities. I quoted the relevant sections of their own financial projections and juxtaposed them with my more conservative, data-backed forecasts. I have also noted that my role as data integrity-led, as defined by company policy, was not represented in the meeting to provide direct analytical input. While I understand the need for streamlined decision-making, Protocol 7b is in place to ensure that critical strategic shifts are grounded in robust data. I am available to discuss these findings at your earliest convenience to ensure full compliance and mitigate any potential risks. I hit send. It was a gentle nudge, a polite reminder of the rules they'd so carelessly ignored. I knew it wouldn't be met with immediate understanding, but rather with annoyance, perhaps even dismissal. But that was part of the plan. The first domino had fallen. By mid-morning, the trickle of confusion began. An internal email chain, originally meant for damage control, started circulating among department heads. It was hushed, guarded, but the panic was palpable. Brenda Sterling, clearly blindsided, was furiously forwarding my report to her team with subject lines like, "What is this?" and "Urgent, clarification needed on Q4 projections." Then came a text message from Mark, a mid-level manager in sales, someone I'd worked closely with on several analytical projects. "Sarah, what the fuck is going on? Vance is losing it. Brenda's team is in meltdown. They're saying the Q4 numbers you sent out are tanking the projections. He's calling them anomalies and saying your report is disrupting the synergy. What did you do?" I smiled faintly. Anomalies was a funny choice of words, considering my job was to identify them. And disrupting synergy? I was simply presenting the truth, the raw data that their carefully constructed narrative couldn't withstand. The second domino fell later that afternoon. A client, Global Innovations Incorporated, a major player in our industry and a cornerstone of our Q4 revenue targets, sent a terse email to Vance's office. The subject read, "Urgent inquiry, discrepancies in projected rollout schedule." Apparently, our projected delivery date for a crucial component, one that was central to their own strategic planning, was now in question based on some internal re-evaluation of supply chain logistics. They'd seen the whispers, the internal panic, and they were calling us out. This wasn't just a minor hiccup. Global Innovations Incorporated was a significant client. Their dissatisfaction could have ripple effects. Suddenly, Vance's carefully curated image of a company on the rise, a company with unwavering strategic vision, was starting to fray at the edges. I received a frantic, slightly slurred voicemail from Mark around 6 p.m. "Sarah, you gotta call me, it's bad. Global Innovations is threatening to pull out. They heard about the supply chain thing. Vance is blaming someone in logistics, but I heard Chen is having a meltdown about cash flow because the Q4 revenue is now looking, not so great. This is all because of your report, isn't it? What's going on?" I didn't call him back immediately. I let the silence hang for a moment. Then, I typed a short, professional reply to his voicemail. "Mark, my report was based on factual data analysis. Protocol 7b requires thorough review before strategic implementation. I recommend everyone familiarize themselves with company compliance procedures. My role is to ensure accuracy, not to disrupt synergy." The true trap, however, wasn't just the disruption. It was the inevitable cascade that Protocol 7b guaranteed. The clause wasn't just about data sign-off, it also had a subclause I'd managed to get buried deep within the implementation guidelines. Any strategic decision made without adherence to Protocol 7B shall be subject to immediate review and potential nullification by the Data Integrity Lead, pending recompliance and audit. Nullification. A nice sterile corporate term for undo. I waited. The emails from Vance's office became more frequent, more desperate. They were a chaotic mix of damage control and thinly veiled accusations. Brenda was sending out frantic team-wide messages about maintaining brand integrity and positive communication, clearly trying to spin the narrative. Chen was sending out revised financial models that looked more like speculative fiction than actual projections. Then came the email that truly signaled the trap was sprung. It was from Vance's executive assistant, a woman named Carol, who usually communicated with the gravitas of a papal envoy. Subject: urgent. Request for clarification and proposed remediation plan. Dear Miss Jenkins, Mr. Vance has requested an immediate meeting to discuss your recent data analysis and its implications on the Q4 strategic outlook. He requires a detailed explanation of your findings and a proposed plan to rectify the discrepancies identified in your report. Please be prepared to present your analysis and recommendations in a meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in Conference Room A. Attendance is mandatory for all members of the executive leadership team. I read it twice. Mandatory for all. The word rectify was particularly telling. They weren't just asking for my analysis. They were admitting they needed to fix something. And that something was their own impulsive, dataless decision-making. The kicker? Protocol 7B also stated that any proposed remedial action, especially one involving strategic nullification, required formal sign-off from the Data Integrity Lead. In essence, they couldn't even fix their mistake without my formal approval. I was no longer just the analyst, I was the gatekeeper. I drafted my reply to Carol, keeping it brief and professional. Subject: urgent. Request for clarification and proposed remediation plan. Dear Carol, thank you for the meeting invitation. I will be present tomorrow at 9 a.m. in Conference Room A. Please confirm that all executive leadership team members, including Mr. Vance, Mr. Chen, and Ms. Sterling, will be in attendance. Additionally, as per Protocol 7B, any proposed remediation plan that involves the nullification or significant revision of previously made strategic decisions will require my formal sign-off. I will come prepared to discuss the necessary compliance steps. Regards, Sarah Jenkins. Data Integrity Lead. I hit send. The tone was polite, almost deferential, but the underlying message was clear. They couldn't move forward, couldn't even begin to fix their mess, without me. They had excluded me from the strategy meeting, but they desperately needed me to salvage the fallout. They thought they were calling the shots. Now they were waiting for my permission to even start cleaning up their own disaster. The trap was set. The mice were scurrying, and I was simply waiting for them to walk right into it. The air in Conference Room A crackled with a palpable tension. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm, or in this case, a corporate reckoning. Vance sat at the head of the table, his usual peacock posture deflated, his expensive suit looking rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. Brenda Sterling, usually radiating an aura of manufactured confidence, was nervously fidgeting with her pearl necklace, her perfectly coiffed hair looking slightly askew. David Chen, the CFO, was pale, his eyes darting between his tablet and the grim faces around him. The usual corporate bravado was gone, replaced by a primal fear of the unknown. I walked in, not with a swagger, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew they held all the cards. My laptop bag felt heavier than usual, not with data, but with the weight of inevitable consequence. I took my seat at the table, not in the reserved VIP section, but in a neutral spot, a quiet observer who was about to dictate the terms. Vance cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Sarah, thank you for coming. We need to discuss this report of yours. His voice was raspy, stripped of its usual executive polish. This disruption. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Mr. Vance, it's not a disruption, it's data. Specifically, it's the data that should have informed your decisions before they were made. Protocol 7B requires a data analysis sign-off for all critical strategic proposals. This was bypassed. Brenda finally piped up, her voice a high-pitched whine. But, Sarah, we were under a tight deadline. We needed to move fast to capitalize on market trends. Your analysis showed potential issues, yes, but we assumed they were minor. Minor risks, I corrected, my tone even, can have major consequences. Global Innovations Incorporated has already flagged concerns about the projected rollout schedule, which is directly tied to the supply chain bottlenecks my report highlighted. David, I believe you've seen the projected Q4 revenue revisions, yes? The ones that indicate a significant shortfall based on current market realities, not wishful thinking? Chen visibly flinched, his gaze dropping to his tablet. He mumbled, "The projections are concerning." Vance slammed his hand on the table, a pathetic attempt at regaining control. "This is all conjecture. Your report is based on assumptions, Sarah. We made strategic decisions based on market intelligence, not on hypothetical problems." This was it, the moment to reveal the true depth of the leverage. "Hypothetical problems," I repeated calmly, opening my laptop. "Let's talk about contracts, Mr. Vance. Specifically, the service-level agreements. Global Innovations Incorporated's contract, for example, includes a penalty clause for delayed delivery of key components. A clause that stipulates a significant financial penalty for each week of delay, escalating after the first month. This penalty, compounded by the projected revenue shortfall from other market segments I flagged, isn't a hypothetical problem. It's a contractual obligation. And frankly, I paused, letting the words sink in. It's a hole that could swallow this company whole. I pulled up a digital copy of the Global Innovations Incorporated contract on my screen, projecting it for everyone to see. I scrolled directly to the penalty clause. The numbers were stark, unforgiving. Vance's face went from frustrated red to a ghastly white. Brenda's pearl necklace stopped its frantic dance. Furthermore, I continued, clicking to another document. Protocol 7B also includes a stipulation regarding compliance audits. It states that in the event of a strategic decision being made without proper data sign-off, and subsequently leading to demonstrable financial or legal repercussions, the data integrity lead has the authority to initiate a formal review and, if necessary, recommend the nullification of that decision. This review can also trigger an independent external audit of all decision-making processes that bypass compliance. The room fell silent. The implication was clear. If they tried to push forward with their flawed strategy, not only would they face the direct penalties, but an external audit could unearth a Pandora's box of other ignored compliance issues, potentially leading to regulatory fines and reputational ruin. Vance finally managed to stammer, "Nullification? External audit? Sarah, you can't. This is corporate suicide." "Corporate suicide," I agreed, "was what you were already attempting by ignoring the data. I am merely presenting the consequences of that action. Now, we have two paths forward. Path A, the narrow escape hatch, if you will, and Path B, the full legal and financial implosion." I looked directly at Vance, my gaze unwavering. Option A. You acknowledge the critical role of data integrity and compliance. You agree to a public restructuring of key leadership roles, specifically involving the immediate resignation of those who spearheaded the decision to bypass Protocol 7B. This would include yourselves. I gestured to Vance, Brenda, and Chen. Secondly, a public apology and commitment to reinforcing data-driven decision-making across all levels, with significant budget reallocation to the Data Integrity Department, including my own. And of course, a substantial personal apology and a severance package for me, commensurate with the value I have provided and the distress caused by this oversight. I let that hang in the air, the implicit threat of a massive payout. Then I turned to Path B. Option B, I said, my voice dropping slightly, is the full legal and financial implosion. I formally initiate the external audit, as is my right under Protocol 7B. The Global Innovations Incorporated. Penalty clause is triggered. Potential breaches of other contractual obligations come to light. The SEC is notified of potential financial misrepresentation due to inflated projections. Your reputations and the company's are destroyed. You face personal liability for gross negligence. And I simply walk away, armed with the knowledge that I was right and you were wrong, and that I have enough documentation to ensure you never hold a position of corporate power again. I let the silence stretch. The choice was stark, brutal, and entirely of their own making. Vance stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Brenda looked like she was about to faint. Chen was already nervously typing something on his tablet, likely calculating the financial fallout of option B. Finally, Vance spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Option A. We choose. Option A. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips. Excellent choice, Mr. Vance. A wise decision, given the circumstances. The aftermath was swift and brutal, but impeccably professional. By noon, an internal memo went out. It cited strategic leadership changes to better align with evolving market demands and a renewed commitment to data-driven decision-making. Vance, Brenda, and Chen were named as departing executives effective immediately, with full severance packages to be disclosed publicly. The memo also announced a temporary restructuring of the executive team, with Sarah Jenkins assuming interim oversight of strategic planning and data integrity initiatives. There was no mention of my role in their downfall, no public accusation. That wasn't my style. My victory was in the quiet, undeniable logic of Protocol 7B. The company would survive, perhaps even thrive, under a more competent leadership. The current executives, stripped of their positions and their reputations tarnished, would be left to contemplate their hubris. As for me, I didn't get a corner office with a view. I didn't get a fancy title that meant nothing. What I got was the satisfaction of knowing that competence, diligence, and a deep understanding of the rules, even the obscure ones, triumphs over arrogance and incompetence every single time. I had proven that the quiet ones, the ones who meticulously documented, who understood the system from the inside out, were the ones who held the real power. They had excluded me from the meeting. So I made sure they couldn't have a meeting, or a company, without me. I didn't forget to send the memo. I strategically delayed the sign-off on their flawed strategy until their own internal processes, their own forgotten protocols, became the instruments of their undoing. It was a perfectly executed corporate checkmate. And that, dear viewers, is how you ensure your voice is heard, even when they try to silence it. You don't shout. You simply ensure the system itself is designed to amplify your quiet, undeniable truth. If watching corporate hubris meet its logical, data-driven demise gets you energized, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales of quiet competence prevailing over arrogant incompetence. Because remember, the most devastating revenge is often the one delivered with a spreadsheet and a smile. They excluded me from the meeting. They paid the price. And that, my friends, is how you win.
The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp hummed with the same dull, uninspired buzz they had for the last 15 years of my life. They were the soundtrack to my existence, a low-grade tinnitus of quiet desperation and unacknowledged labor. My name is Amelia Vance, and for a solid decade, I've been the ghost in the machine, the phantom limb of this entire operation. I'm the one who ensures the servers don't spontaneously combust, the one who can navigate the labyrinthine vendor contracts blindfolded, the one who knows precisely which obscure software license keeps the entire damn ship from sinking. In short, I'm the glue. The very sticky industrial-strength glue that holds this entire overpriced, overhyped edifice together. And apparently, I'm also someone whose name is as interchangeable as a cheap ballpoint pen. This morning, the glue felt particularly strained. It was 8:52 a.m., precisely 8 minutes before my official start time. I was already brewing the lukewarm sludge they called coffee in the break room, a ritual I performed daily, not for myself. I brought my own artisanal French press, but for the executives who'd stumble in later, bleary-eyed and demanding caffeine like it was a birthright. I'd already scanned the overnight server reports, flagged a minor glitch in the international shipping logistics that, if left unchecked, could cause a 2-day delay for a major client's Q4 shipment. Standard procedure, a quick ping to the relevant department, a reassuring note in their shared project management portal, and another potential fire extinguished before it even sparked. As I poured myself a cup of my own superior brew, the automatic doors swished open, admitting the usual morning rush of crisp shirts and forced smiles. And then there he was, Mr. Sterling himself. Or, as I'd come to know him, the embodiment of everything wrong with modern corporate leadership. Nathan Altman. A man whose ego was larger than the company's market cap, whose buzzword vocabulary could fill a thesaurus, and whose ability to remember names was, shall we say, demonstrably lacking. He strode into the break room, a whirlwind of expensive cologne and thinly veiled impatience. His eyes, the colour of diluted seawater, scanned the room with the practiced disinterest of someone who sees employees not as people, but as interchangeable cogs. He grabbed a communal mug, a chipped relic with the Sterling Corp logo faded to near invisibility, and gestured vaguely towards the coffee machine. "Morning, team," he boomed, his voice carrying with an unnerving resonance. "Anything critical on the horizon?" A few mumbled greetings, a perfunctory nod from the finance manager who was already checking his stock ticker. Then his gaze landed on me, standing by my French press, a picture of quiet competence and, frankly, a deeply ingrained sense of professional duty. "Ah, you there," he said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my general direction. "You with the excellent coffee." I took a slow sip, the rich dark roast a stark contrast to the watery disappointment lurking in the pot. "Good morning, Mr. Altman," I replied, keeping my tone neutral, my body language open but not inviting. He squinted, a flicker of confusion dancing in his eyes. "Right, yes. What's your name again?" This was it, the 10th time. The 10th time in the past 6 months that Nathan Altman, the CEO of a company I'd dedicated over a decade to, had forgotten my name. The first time, I'd brushed it off. Everyone makes mistakes. The second, I'd gently corrected him. The third, I'd introduced myself before every meeting. By the fifth, it felt less like an oversight and more like a deliberate act of erasure. But the 10th? The 10th time he asked for my name, right after I'd spent the entire weekend wrestling with a critical server migration that kept us operational through a city-wide network outage, well, that was a new low. It was like being a phantom limb, present and vital, but entirely unrecognized. "Amelia Vance," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the slow burn of indignation igniting in my chest. "I manage IT infrastructure and vendor relations." He nodded, a superficial understanding dawning on his face, as if I'd just revealed a profound scientific breakthrough. "Ah, Amelia, right, good. So, critical things? Anything I should be aware of before I head to the airport? Big day, flight to Tokyo, you know. Important investor meetings." need to make a stellar impression. He said it with a flourish, like he was bestowing a great honor by deigning to share his travel plans with me, the coffee-fetching, name-forgetting drone, Tokyo. Of course, he was always jetting off somewhere exotic, schmoozing with investors, building his personal brand at the company's expense. Meanwhile, I was the one who made sure his emails reached him on that private jet, that his presentations were flawless, that the entire machine hummed along so he could be the charismatic conductor. Actually, Mr. Altman, I began, my mind already whirring, a familiar spark igniting within me. There is one minor detail you might want to confirm before you depart. He waved a dismissive hand. Spit it out, Amelia. Time is of the essence. Daylight saving time, I said, injecting a casual tone into my voice, as if it were an afterthought, a trivial tidbit. It just shifted over the weekend, didn't it? He frowned, his perfectly sculpted eyebrows furrowing in genuine confusion. Daylight saving? What about it? The clocks change in the spring, don't they? Yes, Mr. Altman, I confirmed, my gaze meeting his. A subtle challenge in my eyes. But it changes back in the fall. Today, actually, for most of the US, at least. His eyes darted to his expensive smartwatch, then back to me, a dawning horror creeping into his expression. Wait, you mean it changed today? That's correct, I said, my voice a calm, even keel amidst his rising panic. So, if you're flying to Tokyo, which is 15 hours ahead of Pacific Standard Time, and you assume your flight departs at, say, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, that would actually be 3:00 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, wouldn't it? A full hour difference. He started fumbling for his phone, his usual suave demeanor crumbling like a stale croissant. No, that can't be right. My assistant booked everything. She's impeccable. She'd never. She likely didn't account for the time shift, Mr. Altman, I interjected smoothly. It's a common oversight, easy to miss if you're not meticulously tracking operational calendars, especially when you're focused on broader strategic initiatives. The implied jab hung in the air, unspoken but potent. He was already frantically tapping away at his phone, his face paling with every passing second. My flight? It's in 2 hours. 2 actual hours. If I don't get to the airport now... He scrambled for his briefcase, knocking over a stack of paper cups in his haste. Amelia, you're a lifesaver. Seriously, I owe you one. Big time. He was out the door before I could even register the full impact of his blustering exit. The break room fell silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant clatter of keyboards. I picked up one of the fallen cups, a faint smile playing on my lips. 10 times. 10 times he'd forgotten my name. 10 times he'd treated me like a piece of furniture, a nameless face in the corporate wallpaper. He saw me as a function, not a person. He saw me as someone who made coffee and smoothed over his blunders. He saw me as Amelia, the anonymous IT girl. But he didn't see the meticulous spreadsheets I maintained, the cross-referenced calendars, the contingency plans for every conceivable operational hiccup. He didn't see the years I'd spent learning the intricate workings of this company, not just the technology, but the people, their habits, their blind spots. And he certainly didn't see the deep well of patience I possessed, a well that had finally, irrevocably, run dry. He thought he was flying to Tokyo for crucial investor meetings. He thought he was conducting his symphony of corporate success. But he was about to discover that the orchestra was about to strike a very different and much more discordant note. And it all started with a simple, professionally executed omission. A forgotten reminder. A perfectly timed bout of amnesia. My amnesia. The glue, as it turns out, could also be a formidable weapon. The game was on, and Nathan Altman had just made the first fatal and entirely predictable move. My exit from the break room was not one of quiet resignation, but of quiet anticipation. The real work was about to begin. The sudden departure of Nathan Altman, a whirlwind of panicked apologies and forgotten briefcases, left a curious silence in the Sterling Corp break room. I savoured the last vestiges of my artisanal coffee, the rich bitterness a pleasant counterpoint to the growing satisfaction in my chest. He thought he was flying to Tokyo. He was, in fact, already an hour behind schedule, and his carefully constructed image was about to take a significant hit. But that was just the opening salvo. The real game, the one that would unfold over the coming days, required a more strategic approach. For years, I'd been meticulously cataloguing everything, not just server logs and vendor contracts, but the subtle shifts in corporate culture, the unspoken power plays, the individual habits and blind spots of the executives. My personal cloud storage was a digital fortress, a meticulously organized archive of Sterling Corp's operational history. It contained every email chain, every critical system update, every financial report, every whispered concern from a nervous junior analyst that had been summarily dismissed by those in power. It was a testament to my dedication, yes, but also a meticulously crafted insurance policy. The core of my counterplay lay in two areas: operational vulnerabilities and contractual obligations. Nathan's arrogance had blinded him to the fact that the company's very infrastructure, the systems I'd painstakingly built and maintained, were riddled with potential points of failure, many of which were tied to my intimate knowledge and control. Furthermore, the sheer volume of overlooked contractual details, the clauses I'd insisted on during negotiations that were now buried under years of executive complacency, provided the leverage I needed. The first domino fell the following Monday. I'd taken a personal day, a strategic absence that would cause the least immediate disruption to client-facing operations while maximizing internal impact. It was 9:17 a.m. when my personal phone, the one never linked to Sterling Corp's network, buzzed. It was an internal alert, not from my administrator console, but from a third-party monitoring service I'd subscribed to out of professional curiosity and a touch of foresight. The notification was stark. Critical system failure. Sterling Corp, CRM, Client Relationship Management System, offline. All access denied. Within minutes, my phone was a digital firestorm. Texts from former colleagues, a mix of genuine concern and professional anxiety, began flooding in. Amelia, everything okay? The CRM is down. Total chaos here. Mark Sales support. Bless his frantic heart. Urgent. No client access. No new leads. No order processing. What's happening? Are you working on it? Sarah, operations manager, her usual calm demeanor replaced by a digital panic attack. Then came the corporate-wide emails. First, a vaguely worded announcement about unforeseen technical difficulties, quickly followed by a more panicked plea for IT assistance, attributing the issue to an external security breach. The IT department, bless their well-meaning souls, was scrambling, but they lacked the deep architectural understanding, the intimate knowledge of legacy systems that I possessed. They were trying to patch a dam with duct tape, while I, the architect of the dam, had simply unplugged the main water valve. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of my home office, sipping tea. I wasn't actively doing anything malicious. I was simply letting the systems I had designed to function with my input perform as designed when that input was absent. A specific sequence of automated security protocols designed to prevent unauthorized access after a prolonged period of unaddressed system anomalies had been triggered. It was a fail-safe I'd implemented years ago, and no one had ever bothered to disable or even acknowledge it. The rising panic was palpable. The CRM was the heart of Sterling Corp's sales and client management. Without it, deals stalled, customer inquiries went unanswered, and the entire revenue stream threatened to dry up. I imagine Nathan, likely still jet-lagged and reeling from his missed flight, receiving increasingly frantic calls from his board and his anxious executives. His precious Tokyo meetings would be overshadowed by the unfolding disaster back home. The third domino fell subtly, almost imperceptibly to those not paying close attention. It was a notification from the Sterling Corp Legal Department's internal portal, a system I still had residual access to due to a lingering vendor management role. A senior associate, clearly out of her depth, had initiated an urgent inquiry regarding a series of overdue payments to a critical software vendor. This vendor, a company whose proprietary analytics software was deeply integrated into Sterling Corp's financial forecasting, had sent multiple reminders about late payments. My own carefully filed records showed that these invoices, routed through my old approval chain, had been meticulously processed before my departure. However, as the CRM faltered, so did the automated invoice reconciliation process. Without the CRM verifying the completed payments and flagging them for the finance department's final sign-off, the system was stuck in limbo. The senior associate's query was essentially a cry for help. She couldn't confirm the payment status and, crucially, she couldn't access the vendor contract itself without the CRM's document management module, which was also inaccessible. This meant Sterling Corp was now at risk of losing access to a vital financial tool, a direct consequence of the system-wide failure I had indirectly orchestrated. I decided it was time for the trap to be sprung. Not with an explosion, but with a quiet, precise action that would leave no room for doubt about its source. I drafted a single, polite email. It was addressed to Sterling Corp's General Counsel, a Mr. Thorne, a man known for his meticulous nature and his quiet, almost imperceptible aversion to corporate drama. I also CC'd the lead partner at the law firm that handled Sterling Corp's external legal affairs. The subject line was innocuous. Inquiry regarding overdue vendor payments. Vendor name. The body was brief and factual. I stated that, based on my understanding of Sterling Corp's internal processes and historical payment cycles, a series of payments to vendor name appeared to be outstanding. I gently suggested that a review of the payment records and the active vendor contract might be prudent especially considering the potential for service interruption. I then attached a scanned copy of the original contract, a document I had personally secured and digitized years ago during a renegotiation. I didn't explicitly mention the CRM failure or the broader system collapse. I didn't need to. My email, arriving as it did amidst the escalating panic, acted as a subtle confirmation. It suggested that this wasn't a random external breach, but rather an internal operational breakdown with potentially contractual implications. The fact that I, Amelia Vance, the forgotten IT infrastructure manager, was the one providing this crucial information was no accident. It was designed to force the company to confront the vacuum my absence had created. The response was almost immediate. My personal inbox, which had been relatively quiet, lit up with internal notifications. Emails from Thorne's office, a flurry of concerned messages between legal and the interim IT lead, all peppered with phrases like urgent review, potential breach of contract, and immediate escalation. The scent of my deliberate inaction had drawn the sharks. As the day wore on, the internal chatter intensified. I could sense the shift in their collective consciousness. The initial chaos was morphing into a dawning realization. This wasn't a random technical glitch. This was a symptom of a deeper problem, a problem directly tied to the expertise they had systematically ignored and eventually sidelined. They were beginning to understand that the silent architect of their digital world had, in her quiet departure, taken the blueprints with her. The foundations of Sterling Corp's operations were showing cracks, and they were beginning to suspect that I, Amelia Vance, was holding the hammer. The trap was set. The company was in disarray, their operations crippled, their reputation teetering, and they still had no idea the full extent of the leverage I held. The end game was in sight. The digital silence from Sterling Corp lasted precisely 48 hours. 48 hours of cascading system failures, frantic IT troubleshooting, and a growing sense of dread within the executive ranks. My personal phone, the quiet observer of their unfolding catastrophe, finally rang late on Wednesday afternoon. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen on my personal contacts list in years, but whose voice was instantly recognizable. Arthur Thorne, Sterling Corp's general counsel. His tone was a stark departure from the imperious pronouncements I'd grown accustomed to from his office. Gone was the confident, slightly condescending legal authority. In its place was a strained politeness, a palpable undercurrent of desperation. "Amelia, Arthur Thorne here. I hope I'm not disturbing you." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chamomile tea. "Mr. Thorne? No, not at all. Is there something I can help you with?" My voice was perfectly neutral, devoid of any hint of the satisfaction simmering beneath the surface. He cleared his throat. "Amelia, Sterling Corp is experiencing some rather significant operational challenges. Our IT infrastructure is, shall we say, under considerable duress. We've been attempting to address a widespread system failure affecting our CRM and financial forecasting tools. Our current IT team seems to be struggling to gain traction." I let the silence hang for a beat. "I see. That sounds inconvenient." Inconvenient is a rather mild way of putting it, Amelia. It's bordering on catastrophic. Deals are stalled, client communication is non-existent, and our Q4 projections are in jeopardy. We've received notice from vendor name. regarding potential contract termination due to lack of payment confirmation. Frankly, we're in a rather precarious position. He was getting to it. The carefully constructed facade was cracking. I recall you managed the vendor relations and IT infrastructure for Sterling Corp for quite some time, Amelia, Thorne continued, his voice lowering slightly. Your institutional knowledge is, shall we say, extensive. I dedicated over a decade of my life to ensuring Sterling Corp's systems ran smoothly. Mr. Thorne, I replied, my voice still calm, but with a subtle undertone of steel. I ensured every vendor contract was managed, every system update was implemented, and every potential vulnerability was addressed proactively. It was my job. And we didn't adequately recognize that dedication, Amelia. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20. Nathan is quite distressed. He's attempting to manage the situation from Tokyo, but is proving challenging. Nathan. Stuck in Tokyo, likely facing an enraged board, his reputation in tatters, all because he couldn't remember my name. The irony was delicious. So, Mr. Thorne, I prompted, what is it you need from me? There was a pause, filled with the rustle of papers on his end. We need your expertise, Amelia. We need your access. We need your help to get things back online. We're prepared to make significant concessions to ensure your cooperation. This was it, the moment of truth. I had two options laid out before me, two paths leading to vastly different outcomes for Sterling Corp and for Nathan Altman. Mr. Thorne, I began, my voice steady and clear, projecting an authority that had been cultivated over years of quiet competence. I have no desire to see Sterling Corp fail. I poured my career into building its infrastructure. However, my contributions were consistently overlooked, my name forgotten, and my expertise undervalued. You cannot expect to dismantle the engine and then expect it to run without me. I could hear him swallowing hard. We understand that, Amelia, and we want to rectify that. We are prepared to offer you a substantial compensation package. Reinstatement to your previous role, of course, with a significant salary increase, a substantial bonus, and full autonomy over the IT department. We are also prepared to offer a generous severance package, should you decide this is not a path you wish to pursue further. Option A, a clean slate, a golden parachute, and a tacit acknowledgement of their monumental error. It was tempting. It offered a swift resolution, a return to a semblance of normalcy. But it didn't truly address the core issue, the deep-seated arrogance and disregard for talent that permeated Sterling Corp's leadership. I continued. However, Mr. Thorne, there are other factors at play here. Factors that go beyond mere system functionality. The operational failures you're experiencing are compounded by several contractual oversights, clauses I myself insisted upon years ago during periods of significant renegotiation. For example, the vendor contract with vendor name explicitly states that failure to confirm payment status within 72 hours of notification by the vendor can result in immediate contract termination and penalties. Currently, the lack of CRM access has prevented such confirmation. I let that sink in. The vendor was a critical piece of their financial puzzle, and losing them would have far-reaching consequences. Furthermore, I continued, my voice taking on a more decisive edge, my personal records, meticulously kept and independently archived, detail significant contributions to proprietary software development that fall under specific intellectual property clauses within my original employment agreement. Clauses that, in the event of termination without cause, allow for the reversion of certain intellectual property rights to the employee. I heard Thorne shift in his seat. The politeness was rapidly evaporating, replaced by a dawning horror. "Amelia, what are you implying?" he asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "I am implying, Mr. Thorne," I said, the finality in my voice leaving no room for misinterpretation, that Sterling Corp is facing two distinct paths forward. Path 1, as you've outlined, is my cooperation, which would involve a swift resolution to the current system failures, reinstatement with significant compensation, and a formal acknowledgement of my contributions. This would mean the vendor name contract remains active and the intellectual property in question remains with Sterling Corp. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Then I delivered the second option, the nuclear one. Path 2, I said, my voice dropping to a measured, unwavering tone, involves a failure to reach an agreement. Should I not be satisfied with the proposed terms, or should Sterling Corp fail to address these issues promptly and decisively, I will be forced to initiate formal proceedings. This would include, but not be limited to, a formal complaint to the relevant regulatory bodies regarding the breach of vendor contracts, including significant penalties for Sterling Corp, a full audit of Sterling Corp's IP ownership, which, based on my documentation, would likely result in substantial claims against the company for unauthorized use of proprietary technology, and potentially the immediate cessation of all my operational input, which, as you've witnessed, would cripple your business entirely. The press, Mr. Thorne, has a voracious appetite for corporate malfeasance. This would become a very public, very expensive disaster. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Thorne spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Amelia, this is blackmail." "This is accountability, Mr. Thorne," I corrected, my tone firm. "A consequence of years of underestimation. You have a choice. A reasonable resolution or a complete and utter downfall. The decision, as always, rests with Sterling Corp. I await your response by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Good day." I hung up the phone, a profound sense of peace settling over me. The tea had cooled, but the warmth inside me persisted. I hadn't acted out of spite, not entirely. I had acted out of a deep-seated need for recognition, for justice. My decade of invisibility had been a crucible, forging me into someone capable of executing a plan with surgical precision. The next morning, at precisely 8:47 a.m., my personal phone rang. It was Thorne again. His voice, when he spoke, was devoid of its earlier apprehension. It was calm, resigned, and surprisingly professional. "Amelia, we've reviewed your terms. The board has unanimously agreed to path 1. A small, genuine smile finally touched my lips. "Excellent, Mr. Thorne. I'll require a formal written agreement outlining the exact terms of my reinstatement, including salary, bonus structure, departmental authority, and, importantly, a public acknowledgement of my past contributions and the strategic value I bring. This agreement will need to be reviewed by my own legal counsel before I sign. Of course, Amelia, everything will be provided. And regarding Mr. Altman, Thorne hesitated. He will be resigning his position effective immediately. The board has decided that a changing leadership is necessary to move forward. The news was delivered with a quiet finality. Nathan Altman, the CEO who forgot my name, was out. His reign of arrogance had ended not with a bang, but with a silent, meticulously planned, professionally executed takedown. Within a week, Sterling Corp was back online. The CRM hummed, client communications flowed, and the financial forecasts were restored. The vendor situation was resolved amicably. My name was on every system login, every important document, and the company's internal newsletter featured a prominent article detailing my return and celebrating my invaluable expertise. I returned to Sterling Corp not as the invisible ghost in the machine, but as its rightful custodian. My office was larger, my budget unlimited, and my authority absolute. The fluorescent lights of Sterling Corp still hummed, but now they illuminated a workspace where my contributions were not just acknowledged, but celebrated. The world, I'd learned, rarely gives you what you deserve. Sometimes you have to meticulously plan, patiently wait, and then, with cold, precise action, take it yourself. My decade of being forgotten had been my preparation. The daylight saving time incident was my signal, and the subsequent operational meltdown, my checkmate, if watching corporate hubris meet its match, and quiet competence triumph over arrogant neglect, stirs something within you, consider hitting that like button and subscribing. It's the silent acknowledgement that sometimes the most satisfying victories are the ones fought with intellect, patience, and a perfectly timed reminder of forgotten details. For Sterling Corp, the price of forgetting my name was steep. For me, it was simply the cost of finally being seen.